Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Annette and I'm here to help people to elaborate an independent interpretation of reality and trying to understand together how spirituality is integrated in our everyday life. This is the second part of the third episode of the series called Behind Papers, where we try to understand together how research works and what's the background of research. In this second part, we are going through the sampling process and also the main method that is qualitative interviews. Of course, there are also other methods, but I'm just going deep into this one so we can also draw some parallelisms with the quantitative interviews that we went through in the second episode. Sampling means that we are going to select the participants that are going to be part of the research. A probability sample is a sample that tries to be as objective as possible, as random as possible, so that results can be generalized. While when it comes to qualitative research, a purposive sample means that we're going to select respondents that are going to directly answer our questions, so that they are selected in a precise way to match what we are researching. And of course, this does not allow to generalizations, but that's not really the goal of qualitative research. Of course, it can happen that we want to find a random sample. It really depends, but most of the time in qualitative research, the goal is not to generalize results, but to be highly aware of a specific case. So in that case, even if the sample is not randomized, it doesn't matter because the goal is not to generalize. So there are different types of purposive samples in qualitative research that I'm going to just mention, but we can make a distinction between sample based on two criteria that I'm going to mention in a bit. So purposive samples can be theoretical samples, generic purposive samples, and snowball samples. So these are three categories that I'm not going to explain in details, but what I'm going to make is a distinction between whether a sample is sequential or non-sequential, and whether a sample is decided a priori or is contingent. So the first distinction, so sequential and non-sequential, means that when a sample is sequential, you are going to add the number of respondents in the sample as we go through the research. While when it is non-sequential, it means that before you start to conduct research and finding the respondents, you are going to establish a fixed number of respondents. Of course, there might always be a certain level of flexibility in case more respondents are needed, but most of the time you decide the strategy before. When it comes to a priori or contingent sample, with an a priori sample, it means that you're going to decide the characteristics of respondents before you conduct the research, while the opposite, with a contingent sample, we are going to decide the characteristics of the sample as we go through the research. So of course, you need to ask yourself how many people you need, and that's not always an easy question. There's not like a fixed answer, it depends. So more or less what we can say is that when you need to establish the number of people you need to consider the saturation. So actually what is like more or less the limit when you think you would have enough information. You need to consider, of course, a minimum number of respondents. When it comes to the size of the sample, you can consider a few elements such as the style of the research. So based on the design you use, you can more or less think of an appropriate sample. Then the heterogeneity of the research. So of course, the more elements you need to research, the more different characteristics in a sample you need, the more people you're going to collect. And also the research questions you're going to ask, and that thus the more general the question, the more people you need. So of course, the larger is your research, the greater has to be your sample. In qualitative research, that's more or less what you need to follow when you want to consider the size of your sample. So when it comes to the methods that are used in qualitative research, of course, there are different ones. For example, participant observation or focus groups or collecting documents or artistic projects But yeah, we are going to discuss qualitative interviews so that we can also draw a parallelism with the quantitative interviews. So when it comes to qualitative interviewing, we can say that is much more flexible compared to the quantitative one. So that the ideas are very open-ended, so they leave space to the respondents to actually maybe change the research a bit and go in their way. So it's open to explore something that maybe was not considered at the beginning. The second characteristic is that qualitative interviews are focused on what matters for the respondents. So they are, as I said in the first point, so they are open to listen to people and go deep into their perspectives. When it came to the quantitative interviews, they were mostly serving the researcher's needs, in the sense that the researcher had something in mind that he needed to or she needed to achieve. So the questions were not leaving space for further elaborations. The third characteristic is that the respondent is encouraged to go out of what the researcher was asking, because the respondent might give new information, point of views that were not considered, so that the research can change, can adapt, and actually become something different. So the respondent is actually part, really, in the truest sense of the research. They can collaborate. And of course, this can come out in an interview perfectly, because then it's where you are actually having a conversation with the researcher. Third characteristic is that the interviewer itself can change the questions that he had in mind, because maybe he found something else to ask. So it's not only that the respondent can say something differently, but the researcher can change questions based on the people who is interviewing, differently from what we said in the previous video, where the researcher had like a fixed and standardized and ordered number of questions and he could not change a thing. And the respondents only had limited answers, while here the interviews can change both based on the researcher and the respondent. The fifth characteristic is that researchers conducting a qualitative interview want to collect a significant amount of data to process and to elaborate, while with quantitative research and quantitative interviews, the goal was to collect like standard and limited amount of data so that they could be processed quickly. While the opposite in this type of interviews, qualitative interviews, is actually to get as much as possible so that you can have like a rich understanding of the reality you are exploring. And the last element is that in qualitative research, you can actually interview more people at once, differently from quantitative research, where you had this strict relationship between the researcher and the respondent. Here you can actually have a conversation with more people, and of course this will lead to further exploring the research and see different perspectives coming out together. So it's going to be very rich in details. Moreover, qualitative interviews can be divided into groups. The first one being unstructured interviews, and the second one being semi-structured interviews. What it means? It means that when we conduct unstructured interviews, we are just having like one main question or a few points that we want to touch, but we are not having a structure. So we are just starting the interviews maybe with a question or just like with a conversation. So it has the features of being more like a discussion with someone we know, rather than an interview. So it's very open-ended. So both the researcher and the respondent kind of shape the interviews together. While with the semi-structured interviews, we have some guiding questions. So some main questions that we want to ask to every respondent, and we have a list. And most of the time it also has like an order. So we need to ask those questions following this order. But it's very open and we can change that. We can skip some questions, we can ask other questions, we can change the order if something new comes out. It really depends. So we have these guidelines, but it doesn't mean that they need to be strictly followed, but they can be adapted based on the respondent we are interviewing. We can say that usually researchers that really want to enter the world of respondents tend to prefer unstructured interviews, because this really allows to create a discussion, to let the respondent leading the interview as well, while when we are researchers that actually want to have a clear focus more than a general one, we tend to prefer semi-structured interviews. Also, semi-structured interviews are very useful when we interview more people at once, because this allows a certain level of comparability. It's also useful when we conduct multiple cases research, so when we want to compare different cases. And also, differently from quantitative interviews where questions are straight to the point, the respondent can only give an answer among a set of answers, and usually you tend to influence the interview as little as possible, so trying to be more like detached from the respondent. In qualitative interviews, you can actually use certain tools to enrich the interviews, or actually helping the respondent to elaborate on what they're saying. For example, you can use pictures, you can use pieces of journals, you can use videos, you can use images, so that the respondent can add something new, can like give another perspective based on what they're observing, or if they don't know about a specific topic, you can show that to them so they can give their own opinion. Usually when using photos, it is called photo elicitation, but that's not the goal. It's just to say that it's full of elements that we can use to further collect data and let respondents explore the topic we are discussing. And of course, qualitative interviews can be conducted in different ways, such as having a video call, or just a telephone call, or live. It depends, and of course each of them has its own pros and cons. For example, if we have a phone call, then the pros is that it's less time consuming and you don't need to move from your house, so there's not the problem of distance or traveling, but at the same time you're missing out the body language, the expressions that the respondent is making, so you're going to miss out certain elements that might be useful for the research. And of course there are different types of qualitative interviews. It's not only like asking you questions, but there's also, like, for example, a oral history or life story where the goal is just to, make one big question and the person is going to tell you about his life. There are different types, and of course there are also different methods we can use in qualitative research that I did not discuss. But if you're interested, just let me know. We can make another video on more methods. I just thought it was already too much. So yeah, if you're interested, I would be happy to do another video. Otherwise, that's just fine. So we came to the end of this video, the third episode of the series Behind Papers. Here we have explored the process of sampling respondents and also the method of qualitative interviews. I'm happy for the people that came to this point, to these long videos I am making, but I really think they are useful, and at least to me they help me to really open my eyes, and really I use them as tools to navigate in reality and in the amount of information we approach every day. And I also think that when more people come together to discuss certain elements, certain points, certain realities, it's better, it's easier, it's nicer to share ideas and views. But yeah, it's up to you whether you want to comment, whether you want to contact me, whether you want to say something about these. Of course, when we will make examples with research articles, there will be actually material to discuss more concretely. But yeah, if you have something to say up to now, I'm hoping to read your comments and answer to you. Yeah, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you are looking forward for the fourth episode that is coming out. And yeah, please subscribe to the channel, so it's going to really help me out in growing as a channel, as a person as well, together with you. And also don't forget to activate the notification bell, because it's going to help you to not miss the next video. I always remember I have an Instagram page as well that I'm writing here. Yeah, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed it. I see you in the next one. Bye!